entity that pulled this conference together from its inception. It's community that has informed the very foundation of this conference. But in a real way, community absolutely does not mean the absence of struggle. The conference is a working conference, and it means for us, and it has meant for us, moving beyond mere definitions. The conference is about practice. The practice that brought you here, the practice that we will do for the next 2 days, and the practice beyond. The question for us, and there are several, is how do we make sense out of this anti-human climate in which we live? And what are we going to do about it? We know that we have the power to develop a vision and to move beyond that vision, and that we could be strong in a vision for social justice. And that we, as Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered people of the African diaspora, have an important analysis to give, to contribute to that vision. We want to speak for ourselves. No longer do we want to be spoken for. So we have crucial things to say, and we will say them all. And among them, we want to say that community is about difference. It's not about sameness, and we're going to struggle over those differences. And the second thing, at least, we want to be able to say is that we must do global analyses to help us do our work locally. Because corporations and the state and conservatives know how to work across the geographical boundaries they themselves have created. And it's about time we started to do the same. Welcome again to Black Nation, Queer Nation, a working conference to examine, look at, work through, struggle over the issues relating to sexuality among people in the African diaspora, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered. Welcome into this process as well. This has been a long process that has taken us close to 2 years, actually, in which much can happen. But we want to say collectively that everybody here, everybody who is with us for these 3 days, you are active participants in building this conference. None of us as individuals own the vision for this conference. We have just started it off. So welcome to this partnership of energy, building, thinking, working, loving, laughing, and struggling. A particular welcome to New York, because New York is such an inhospitable place. We have come from many places for this conference, as far away from South Africa, from London, from Canada, but it doesn't mean at all that the international is only outside of the borders of the United States. We have come from San Francisco, New York, the 5 boroughs, Ohio, and we can name it. I don't mean to miss anybody, but we can name it all. So welcome to these 3 days of work. It's serious work. It's work that has brought you here, work that you will continue to do for these 2 days, and work that you will do beyond.
Samuel R Delaney, a well-known science fiction writer, is the author of Babel 17, The Einstein Intersection, both Nebula Award winners, Dahlgren and Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand. While Delaney has written numerous novels and short fiction, including Tales of Nevarion, many know him for his outstanding memoir, The Motion of Light and Water. His most recent novel, The Mad Man, 2 words, has been nominated for a Lambda Literary Award in the mystery category. And his new book of essays, Silent Interviews and Black Popular Culture, Silent Interviews on Language, Race, Sex, and Science Fiction, and some comics, will be released I'm sorry, when did you say that's good?
It's been out for a couple of months.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Chip Delaney currently lives in New York and teaches at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Chip.
Yesterday, Elias talked about liberating bodies, a wonderful enterprise and one that I am 100% behind. But I think of my own work more as clarifying language. And under the rubric of intellectual discourse in the questions asked today, I wanted to go and talk directly about these three much beleaguered terms that exist in the title of our conference. Nation, that falls with its plurals at the beginning, twice in the name of the conference, queer and black. Nation, when it's used in the title of our conference, of course, is a metaphor. And when we ask what that metaphor is doing, it clears, I think, if we say what exactly it is a metaphor for. If we talked about black communities, queer communities, which of course is what the nation in the title of the conference is a metaphor for, we're suddenly speaking about something far more vulnerable than we would be if we were speaking about nation. And it brings to mind the notion of a nation, not only that as something, as Kabina said, that lives beyond us, but it's also something that can defend itself. A nation is something that can raise an army. A community is specifically something that is legally refused the raising of an army. That's one way to think about the differences between them. So I think when we use the metaphor of nation within a national situation, it functions as a metaphor to suppress or turn the focus away from our vulnerability. Now there are many, many times in encounters with the real world when it's not necessary, or it is necessary rather, to turn not to think about our vulnerabilities, but to think about our strengths. And this is perhaps the time when this nation metaphor works in a positive way. But I think if the communities that we live in, the gay communities, the black communities, their intersections between one another, their encounters with one another, their interrelations with one another, if these communities are to survive, I think it's very necessary to interrogate precisely what the vulnerabilities of these communities are. Otherwise, they're not going to be around terribly long because they can be subverted, they can be overthrown, they can be eradicated. So that seems to me to be one of the things that this metaphor of nationhood is doing when we use it, two of the things that it does. Queer has also brought up a lot of contention, and we heard some of it on the panel yesterday morning. I think it's interesting and perhaps illuminating just to talk about where a term like queer came from. How did it get here? And then we can, of course, go ask, after it's gotten here, what is it doing? When I was a young person, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, in the late 50s, early 60s, queer was my self-designated term for who I was. That's the term that I ordinarily use. That's the term that all my friends used. If you read my autobiography, The Motion of Light and Water, you'll find that term. That's the term that I used for myself back then. If you read my very good friend Martin Duberman's autobiography, you will find that the term that he used and the term that his friends used was gay. Now, what are some of the differences between Marty and myself? One of the differences is that Marty went to Harvard. I'm a City College dropout. Another of the difference, of course, is that Marty is white, I'm black. Another difference is that when I asked him, sort of in preparation for saying this today, when did he get tenure? He said 71, 72. He says, I don't even remember. I got tenure only 6 years ago. Okay, this is, what we're talking about here, I think it's fairly clear, is class. Now, class not in any necessarily demonized or pejorative ways, but simply two trajectories through the society. Basically, queer started off as the working class, the self-designated working class term for those who were homosexual, and gay was the middle class, possibly even upper middle class, if you want to make that kind of distinction. Marty and certain people got access to the media before working class people did, and so the term that they used became the term that was presented as a self-designated term. And when I certainly first heard the term gay, although it was something that I had encountered at a distance, I heard the term, but it wasn't my term. Nevertheless, I was very, very happy to take it over and acknowledge it as a self-designated term. And a great deal of work, in fact, I would say almost all the work in the first 25 years of gay liberation has been done under that term.
Coco Fusco is an interdisciplinary artist and writer currently living in Los Angeles. She is a Mellon Fellow in Critical Studies at the California Institute for the Arts. Her collection of essays entitled English is Broken will be published in May.
English is broken here.
Oh, but that's not what you have.
Sorry, okay. Sorry. It's English is broken here. Sorry.
English is broke. Her collection of essays entitled English is Broken Here will be published in May by the New Press. Coco Fusco.
Sorry. Thanks to all the organizers for putting all of this together, all of this incredible energy together, and for inviting me here. There are a few things that I wanted to do very quickly, because I know we're supposed to be very quick. And I'm feeling somewhat daunted by having to follow in the footsteps of all of these incredible speakers. But anyway, I just want to make a few rambling comments about the question of nationalism, although it seems as though enough has been said, but I just want to add a little bit to it. Read you a little bit from an essay that I wrote for a book on contemporary African-American art, in which I talk about African-American performance and the use of nudity and the sort of historical construction of nudity in black culture. And just a little bit of that, because it would take much too long to read the whole thing. And then finally, show a 5-minute video, which I just obtained on a trip to South Africa, about a political protest organized by a group of black women in a township, in which they decided to strip in front of a white policeman in order to prevent their shanties from being razed to the ground. So I'll begin and not take more time. To add to what's already been said about thinking about nationalism, as I was been listening to different people comment on the term and on the problematizing of the term, I just wanted to add to it that I'm reminded over and over again of sort of how we're placing ourselves and what allies all of us with our various associations and identifications as people who are here trying to question and critique a certain given of what we understand nationalism to be. And I think that beyond gender and sexual identification, that there's also a generational one for many of us, that we, at least people who I associate as being part of my generation, were sort of raised in the wake of the civil rights movement and raised by nationalists who, and that a lot of our battle is somewhat Oedipal. Even that's not to say that nationalism doesn't exist among members of our own generation, but it was some of the more positive aspects of black nationalism that enabled many of us to get the educations that we've gotten, et cetera, et cetera. And so I say this not because I'm a nationalist, but because I worry at this particular moment in our history where a lot of the gains that were brought about to a certain extent by some of the more positive attributes of nationalism are really being threatened. As much as I would like to eliminate the radically exclusionary attitudes of certain forms of black nationalism, I don't want to get rid of affirmative action. And I really feel very strongly about making those kinds of distinctions, especially when in the last few years in sort of the with the emergence and flowering of very facile writing off of nationalism in the discourse of this anti-essentialism and of political correctness, I worry about a kind of facile mouthing of, oh, you guys are just essentialists, oh, you guys are just nationalists, and dismissing all kinds of cautionary waving of flags about, wait a minute. And so I'm trying at this point in time to understand a certain kind of residue of nationalism that we might not want to throw away, which is historical memory. And I really worry a lot about that as I think about the Black reception of contemporary cultural practices and a lot of the negativity around certain kinds of cultural practices. I want to, at least what I tried to do in this essay that I'm going to excerpt from, draw some what I consider to be important distinctions between the puritanical attitudes of the white Christian right. I knew I wasn't going to be able to say that. And some of the sensitivity and sort of hypersensitivity in what we understand as the Black community to the deployment of certain kinds of cultural strategies, particularly the use of nudity. The reason why I worry about it is because I worry about and care about communicating with that audience. And I don't think that we're going to get anywhere beyond this room unless we try to understand how that sensitivity and why that sensitivity exists now still, and why certain members of our communities feel the need to invoke historical memory at certain times to pressure us into recognizing what we are doing. And I don't mean that we should embrace that as any kind of censorship, but there has to be some kind of bridge to begin communication with people who we just would otherwise write off as not understanding the radicality of what we do. Another was when the Decade Show, I don't know if any of you remember that artistic project that took place in 1990 in New York that brought together basically white, avant-garde, Black, and Latino cultural institutions to bring together the art from the decade of the 1980s. And there were a lot of discussions in the planning of the exhibition about what kind of art would go to which institution. And the Studio Museum made it in Harlem made it very clear that they could not handle any kind of performance that involved nudity or explicit sexuality because, quote unquote, the community was not ready for that sort of thing. And this is the kind of thing that gets invoked over and over again, and I kept on thinking about it and kept on wondering what to do with this other than sort of writing all these people off as ignorant. And so I tried to go back to history to understand it. So here's a little bit from the paper. Whether its intent be to escape the strictures of the art market, to break with the tradition of appreciating finely made objects, to explore extreme forms of behavior, or to draw the aesthetic experience back into the sphere of communal ritual, performance art is nearly always centered on the body, the artist's body. The challenge to the body's physical limits and to established cultural sensibilities, the use of nudity, and the exploration of gender issues and homoerotic desire have been key elements of American performance art of the past 25 years. The Christian right's prudent attacks on the uses of the body over the past 6 years are largely attributable to a resurgence of anti-intellectualism and social conservatism in mainstream American life. Not coincidentally, the attack on the uses of the body and the exploration of sexuality in contemporary art has paid disproportionate attention to representations by and of Black people, especially Black men. This special scrutiny links censorship in the present with a host of other forms of social control and coercion levied against the Black population. However, a host of other factors contribute to the anxiety that treatment of these issues generates in diasporic Black communities. To understand what the presentation of the Black body signifies in the here and now, one must take into account the history of its representation. While conceptualism's questioning of the objectification and commercialization of the art object may have been a prime motivation behind the various forms of art making involving the body for the white avant-garde, Black debates about the exploitation and commodification of their culture began long before the 1960s and have consistently invoked the memory of slavery and minstrelsy. The interrelationship of nudity, enslavement, and public display of the Black body is typified by the spectacle of the auction block. This mode of exploitation was supported by the punitive practice of stripping, beating, and otherwise violating black bodies in public as a sign of power and ownership. To this regard, critic Elizabeth Alexander has argued eloquently for the existence of a traumatized collective historical memory in the African American community of watching the black body be subjected to pain for public consumption. And here, in the essay that I referred to here, she was talking particularly about what's involved in watching the Rodney King tapes if you consider yourself to be the member of a black community. Among the responses to such forced exhibitionism is the tendency to protect certain black cultural practices by enshrouding them in secrecy, or to mask meanings with ever-shifting codes and heavy doses of irony. Not only would rituals and idiolects have to be protected, but so would the body have to be shielded to avoid a host of painful, even dangerous associations. The history of black people's identities having been reduced to bodies that were theirs but which they did not own, and of those bodies having been classified as inferior, degenerative, and otherwise aberrant, thus justifying their being treated as curiosities, could not otherwise be countered. Furthering this need was the establishment of mass entertainment's heavy dependence on the commercial exploitation of the black body, beginning in the period of minstrelsy and going to the golden age of Hollywood and beyond. The sensitivity to the implications of performing for white audiences did not arise then out of essentialist willfulness, but rather as a defense against the real existence of abuse of power. Black performers were, and some would argue still are, repeatedly compelled to enact a drama of degradation through the reproduction of negative stereotypes. Now, here I get into more detail, and I'm just going to read a couple more paragraphs of what I try to plot out as some points in this history that are particularly sensitive. And then I'll go to the last paragraph, and then we'll move to the tape. The prime example of this is the Hottentot Venus, who, while her genitals were studied by early 19th century European scientists, was also exhibited as an object for white voyeuristic consumption. The Hottentot Venus's nudity, like that of thousands of Africans who appeared in late 19th and 20th century ethnographic photographs, was taken as a sign of uncivilized exhibitionism that, quote-unquote, good blacks would have to distance themselves from. The case of the Hottentot Venus is connected to a larger history in Western culture of excessive sexualization of the black body, male and female. Josephine Baker's stylized faux primitive 1920s stage persona, complete with banana skirt, capitalized on that history. Playing on the colonial fantasies of whites, the image of the oversexed black body taps into white desires for and fears of black power, which can be marshaled when needed to justify violent forms of control. The history of consumer tastes in this century, ranging from the interest in things black, which was the 1920s, to the craze over jungle music in the 1950s and onwards, indicates that the desire for black performativity corresponded to a recurring sense of the excessive rationality, repression, and spiritual emptiness in white society.
Our last panelist to speak is Essex Hemphill, writer, poet, and cultural activist. He is well known through his participation in the black gay films Looking for Langston and Tongues Untied, which aired on PBS in the summer of 1991. Essex has also participated in Out of the Shadows, narrating the Black Gay AIDS documentary. He is also the editor of Brother to Brother, New Writings by Black Gay Men, and the author of 3 books of poetry and prose, Earth Life, Conditions, and Ceremonies. His work has been anthologized in numerous publications, including Art Against Apartheid, Men and Intimacy, and The Poet Upstairs. His essays have appeared in High Performance, Gay Community News, Out Week, and The Advocate. He is the recipient of the Pew Fellowship in the Arts in 1993 and the Visiting Scholars Fellowship at the Getty in Santa Monica in 1993. Essex Hemphill.
I'd like to first, hello, is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to first say hello to all of you. Blessings for your safe arrival here at this conference. I'm sorry I didn't see the first day's activities, or even I haven't even had a chance to hear the buzz yet, so I'm sure I'll get some of that while I'm here. I would like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me and being patient with me. And I'd also just like to take a moment to acknowledge people I think have inspired me and empowered me over the years, people who are no longer with us. I send this work out to them this morning: Pat Parker, Audre Lorde, Joseph Beam, and Marlon Riggs. When I think about identity, and when I thought about identity as I prepared for this conference, I became very schizophrenic. I reached up in my medicine cabinet and I didn't have anything there to help me resolve the schizophrenia. I think it is not enough that I am just simply black and gay, but there's so many other aspects of my identity that are identities that are not often as politicized or even given the same respect. One of the identities I presently wage battle with, accept, reject, is being a person with AIDS. I decided to somehow, in my poet's sensibility, to go at different aspects of this. I knew I was going to be up here with some heavy hitters. So, so I don't have the multisyllabic things to say. I just have what's in my heart presently. Counting T cells on the shores of cyberspace. This is for Roger. I was counting T cells on the shores of cyberspace and feeling some despair when along came a handsome single man bearing a fresh bouquet for me. As I try to love myself for the first time in my life, he comes and challenges me to claim a higher ground than I imagined. As I try to love myself for the first time, he comes along encouraging me to consider loving him too. If I had known sooner the true power of love to heal and affirm, I would have left the bathhouses, bushes, and bookstores immediately. I would have sooner done battle with my life-threatening addictions. I would have pursued a healthy way of living with more diligence than I gave to pursuing and busting a nut. Had I known sooner how simply beautiful love is, my self-destruction might have ended earlier. For the record, I am still an invisible man, and ironically, I am also visible. The visibility I possess is shaped by racism, prejudice, and self-destructive behavior. Beyond entertainment, athletics, sex, and scandal, the most popular depiction of black males is as dangerous, bloodthirsty criminals to be contained at all costs. These are not whole images. They are selected and represented as evidence of how black males are. Just like my dick, my criminality is exaggerated. Supposedly, I am a threat larger than life, and for this, I am treated myself as less precious than life. I didn't make many of the black image selections represented in popular culture, nor have I personally fomented the fear and distrust that surrounds black identity. Our handsome sable skins, radiant in many breathtaking shades, mark us just the same as suspects and persons to be feared. Why such beauty as I see in black folks, as I see in black men, is continually violated and condemned is a perplexity weighing a worrisome trouble on my mind. Our broad noses mark us, our fleshy lips mark us, our way of walking and talking mark us daily as targets for insult, humiliation, and injury. I inherited the dangers of visibility from my father, along with coarse, woolly hair and rusty brown skin. I love my nappy hair. I love my rusty skin. I don't blame my father for our circumstance, just as he doesn't blame his father for his inheritance, which is like my own. The texture of my hair and the color of my skin are just two examples of the prerequisites required for visibility and suspicion. I am profoundly perplexed by this continuing adversity and the unnecessary loss of life that occurs as a result of being seen. I have miscegenated and mutated, tolerated and assimilated, and yet I remain the same in the eyes of those who would fear and despise me. I stand at the threshold of cyberspace and wonder, is it possible that I am unwelcome here too? Will I be allowed to construct a virtual reality that empowers me? Can invisible men see their own reflections? I am stepping to the 21st century with college degrees, police records, a handful of T-cells, disease, and gunshot wounds. I'm wearing Rolex watches and cowrie shells, Hilfiger jeans and Armani suits, mudcloth and crowns. I'm sporting dreadlocks and baseball caps, prison uniforms, and expensive sneakers. To the dismay of some, I'm carrying footballs, laptops, illegal weapons, notorious celebrity. I'm carrying trauma into cyberspace, violent gestures, a fractured soul, short fuses, dreams of revenge. I sing and dance as fiercely as ever, as provocatively as ever. It matters not that I use my body lewdly if it means I'll get paid. Black men killing black men is treason. Black men killing black women is treason. Black men killing black communities leaves me speechless. As always, I am rewarded accordingly when I fulfill the racist fictions of my aberrated masculinity. My primary public characteristics continue to be defined by dreads of me, myths about me, and plain old homegrown contempt. All this confusion is accompanying me into cyberspace, every indignity and humiliation, every anger and suspicion. As the final decade of the 20th century reaches its nadir, black masculinity continues being sadistically punished, sadistically confined and deflated, and, whenever possible, destroyed. Additionally, ideas about building healthy black communities and the creation of liberatory strategies to achieve that are still constructed in the context of patriarchy around reclaiming and empowering black dick. Black empowerment for some brothers means opposition to feminism and other possibilities of liberation, possibilities that are not dependent on success because a man is willing to act for freedom. If men aren't leading the way to liberation, it doesn't mean there will be no liberation. It's not easy loving yourself as a black person, a black male living in America, and it's not any easier for our sisters either. At the threshold of cyberspace, I do not believe the popular Afrocentric notion that all black people are descendants of kings and queens. Someone had to clean the temples. Y'all like a light this. Someone had to carry water from the river. Somebody cooked the dinners that was served in the temple. Don't be confused. Racism doesn't go better with a big dick or a hot pussy or royal lineage. Homophobia isn't a becoming aspect of anyone's character. A sex change and cross-dressing won't hold racism at bay. Don't waste time measuring who's in more pain than whom. Eradicate pain. Create nurturing realities. No one person, no one gender is more equipped to confront such a massive detail of misery and despair as must be eradicated from our lives. We need the unconditional help of one another, a commitment that doesn't waver, I remain an endlessly exploited American and diasporan commodity, imported and exported from one capital of racism to another. I'm ruthlessly hunted, zealously hounded. I am complicitous and responsible in some of my destruction, and sometimes I'm a brave, emboldened warrior preventing destruction from occurring. The media would have us believe it is a curse to be the mother of a black son as the 20th century nears its end. I do not agree. It is still a blessing to be the mother of a black child regardless of its gender. And it isn't true that all black men are neglectful fathers, violent husbands, and genetically predisposed to laziness. The daily TV and newspaper parade of black men being led away in handcuffs or under bloody sheets or under suspicion is endless. They are cruel and heartbreaking pictures, evidence of what this pernicious visibility can cost. Image after image displays black masculinity as villainous and violent. Black men are represented as uncaring and uncommitted to anything other than perversion and hedonism. American soil is still not very safe for me. I am still met with formidable resistance. I am still perjured and punished for being black and male, black and gay. Perhaps the most invisible, visible persons in the pantheon of cultural and political blackness are the black faggot and his sister, the black dyke. I am one of those detested and condemned homos who is quite often vilified, offensively caricatured, humiliated, and silenced by black cultural practices. I too come from the same mysterious womb of blackness as did my brothers, who would judge me less a man than themselves, less black than themselves. Straight black men sometimes act as if being gay allows me to more easily get a taxi, an education, a job, a house, a loan. In some of their eyes, I am viewed as disturbed, emasculated, white-acting, and defeated. My claim to communal black heritage has often been challenged or denied simply because of my different sexuality. My heterosexual brothers should finally know that being gay doesn't accord me any special privileges or protection from oppression. The police continue pursuing me as a suspect. Store clerks eye me suspiciously and follow me as I shop. My income on average is less than the income of white males. Black lesbians and gays experience this assault just like every other black person. Homosexuality doesn't exclude us from racist malice. It doesn't safely envelop us and keep prejudice and discrimination at bay. I am not insulated from white injustice nor black homophobia by claiming my gay self. Loving a brother as I do doesn't give me an escape, a way to avoid racial issues. Instead, I gain an intimate comrade, a soul boy to love, a cherished friend, a trusted mate. How blessed and lucky we are is immeasurable and not life-threatening to black culture and liberation. Our gay and lesbian love is an invaluable cultural and social asset, not a tragic liability. I occupy my lover's long-fingered hands at the threshold of cyberspace. I am honored to watch his back. I am blessed that he watches mine. We are not invisible to one another. We are not afflicted with that peculiar stigma of vision. I see him. He sees me. When I occupy his eyes, the reflection he returns sometimes startles me with its immense joy. I can't believe it is me I am seeing there, but every indication of my happiness tells me it is true. We dare to love one another in the face of judgment and condemnation from jack-legged black clergy and demagogues. We dare to love. It's that simple. I love him. He loves me. At least to one another, we are not fragmented and invisible. The face I gaze into doesn't gaze back at me with hatred and contempt. I met him with less than 10 T cells in my body, and he met me with hundreds in his. Despite everything in our lives that could be dismal and defeating, we have chosen one another, a great chance we've taken, and we have no idea of what the outcome will be. I won't go to a seer or a shell reader to query the future of our romantic friendship. I don't want the doctor to tell me how long it's gonna last. I try to show my thanks and appreciation daily in every little thing I do for him, in all the ways I consider him. I leave the worry for another day that I pray won't come soon to dog us. Counting T cells on the shores of cyberspace, my blessing is this: I do not stand alone, bewildered, and scared. Thank you.
Thank you, Essex. Let me just ask this question. It's procedural, I think. Betty Powell, do you want to come out and make your announcement now or after the question and answer?